address the most critical things in the world, according to the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, it would cost less than 0.5% of our global GDP if we were to address that. And it would be less than 0.0000, and I have a lot of zeros, if we put it in context of all the
Hi everyone, welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry consortium committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I am the co-host here with Manuel, another co-host, and also the executive director at AKFI, and our special guest today, Vivi. Hi, Vivi.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite.
So glad you're here with us today. Thanks to this talk series, we get to connect with great minds from all over the world to together discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Vivi is currently an independent consultant and working across several industries and serves as the Center for Responsible Business at Berkeley Haas, University of California. With over 17 years of experience, prior to this, Vivi was the head of sustainability and corporate strategy for Unilever North America. And before that, she was part of the Unilever's global corporate strategy team in London, supporting the overall company's medium long-term plans with an emphasis on inclusive capitalism. Thank you, Vivi, for being here, and so glad to have you and to share your 17 years experience in sustainability with our audience. You were way ahead of us because to many of us today it's a very new topic in regarding to sustainability. To start our conversation, what are the key trends to consider when reimagining capitalism?
Okay, that's a very big question for first thing in the morning, but thank you for that, quite timely. And I appreciate that we start with the bigger, capitalism rather than the ESG, because in the full context, the ESG can just be very small with the broader topic of what we're discussing. And I think it's not that it's a trend, it's just a reality in where we are today, that we have 9 planetary boundaries, of which 6 have been already, overused in less than 100 years of industrial revolution. And we have an economic output that is not really necessarily getting to everyone in the planet. I mean, more than ever, we have a tremendous inequality that now, is surpassing very, very serious social tipping points. I mean, when 50 billionaires in the world have more wealth than half of humanities, then, we are in an interesting situation, and to say the least, I mean, this week, the entire world is watching really what is happening geopolitically, which is something quite difficult. So it's not just about where we are in terms of an economic framework that it was designed in the 1970s, based on infinite growth, based on infinite planetary boundaries, and not necessarily geared up to put people and a human capital at the center of this either. So, I will just say that there is pretty much everything to be done. I mean, we have learned a lot on things that work, that don't work. And without a doubt, technology is helping us tremendously to organize all of this. And I'm happy to go into that in a second, because we are also in a moment in where, yes, there is a lot of things happening, but because of that, I believe we are in a fantastic opportunity to reshape and redefine a lot of this. And there is a lot of work on this, which is another very good news. The concept of inclusive capitalism, or, there's a lot of names for this lately. And the term that I prefer the most is transition economy, because our economy will go through a transition. And under that transition, I believe, is what we're going to see one of the biggest changes. And I hope that in this process, we're also going to adopt some of the many recommendations that a lot of these coalitions have been working on in the last few years. So the ground is fertile in terms of what solutions are out there. what I think it's vital that we focus on is in leadership, which is a renewable will that we see quite scarce lately. Because in this inclusive capitalism topic, it is, I think it's safe to say that it's not lack of resources. I mean, with our economy being bigger than $100 trillion just in GDP, to address the most critical things in the world, according to the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, it would cost less than 0.5% of our global GDP if we were to address that. And it would be less than 0.0000, and I have a lot of zeros, if we put it in context of all the wealth estimated in the world, which is more than $1.4 quadrillion estimated provincial capital. So good news is that we have never, ever in the human history had so many resources. The other good news is that we now have a lot of technology and potential solutions in place that could help us navigate all of this transition. And that leadership is a renewable will, right? So let's start with that positive side of the inclusive capitalism conversation. But I do worry that with everything that is happening, we're losing track of the people component, especially in an AI world, right? So if we already know that in the current economic framework, people are a liability or a cost for a financial sheet and not considered as an asset and as a value creation, that in and by itself is going to place us in a not so good position in the markets. And when we look at a holistic way, what does this mean for the, let's say, top organizations in the world? The disclosure on human capital and the key elements of the people component are not really disclosed. They're not mandatory. This is not standard. We've had a lot of focus and learnings on the environmental side, which is fantastic, and I celebrate a lot of it. But there is a very, very long way when we look at inclusive capitalism and the human and the people side of it. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in this decade, in where AI obviously is going to have a bigger impact in the workforce and the shift of all of this. I'm happy to take a pause here in case there's any questions.
We have a ton of questions for you, Vivi. No, we're not going to run out today. So really, two key words that I picked up, inclusive and transition. And I think if I summarize, these have to happen with the transition in the right direction. Because if the transition is in the wrong direction and AI becomes an exclusive technology in the hands of few, I like your 50-50, 50 people control 50% of the world wealth. If that results in further accumulation of wealth, instead of including the people, as you said, we see many tipping points. So I think you brought a great summary, at least for starting the conversation today. I want to change a little bit because you are also visionary. Isabella is also a futurist, and I hope we can talk today also more about her work. But you had a TED Talk, if I remember correctly, 9 or 10 years ago, and you titled it, "Don't Quit Your Job, Use It for Good." If we are TED Talk today, would you add or change anything to that theme that is so future looking when you put it together, right? That was before COVID, before the Great Resignation, all the changes we've seen in the workplace with AI.
I've never been asked that question about the TED Talk. I would say the title will be the same, maybe with an extra, change your job and use it for good. And by that, I mean, you don't have to go to another organization. I do believe everything needs to change anyway. So any individual, wherever they are, it is important that we have that mentality of reshaping and readjusting things. Everything at the end will be geared up to something related eventually to climate or adaptation or to new business models that are going to have to find a way to be, to be financially viable in the short, medium term with a set of limited resources that before we were not putting into the equation. And because of that, a lot of things will change. So arguably, everyone has the capability to reinvent their own jobs. And if that doesn't fit, of course, to use that energy for good, it may be another situation in where that focus and that skills will be better used. But I do believe there's going to needs everywhere. And quite frankly, if even oil and gas industry, I would say they're one of the most important industries in where your job usage for good is critical. Without oil and gas, people and assets and all their industry, we cannot do this economic transition. So this is about people. This is about organizations having purpose, but it's not that organizations have purpose. People have purpose, not the organizations, right? So when you have that in the leader or in any person of the organization, it does change the mindset, and it does change an approach in where you are solution driven, in where you are, flexible and versatile enough to accommodate to anyway increasing change that we all have to go through for whichever aspect of our lives that is, whether if it's the pandemic or the climate crisis or socioeconomics or personal reasons for whatever, is that capacity to adapt, to some extent self-disrupt, and understand that change is imminent and it's just part of life. And we are in a decade in where a lot of the things as we know them will be challenged. And that, I think, it's also a fantastic opportunity for us to rethink. And who better than someone that is doing a task and understands that there's now externalities challenging that process. Okay, how do we do it differently? So I think it'll be around those type of I don't know if that answers, Manuel, the question about the TED, but
it does, definitely. You brought in the purpose in leadership and the collective purpose of stakeholders. Employees are key stakeholders in the present and the future of any real enterprise. We focus too long only on shareholders' value, right? So you brought, I think, the purpose, and you brought the value that the employees have to bring. And I would add with a little smile, if you want, that also you're adding more responsibility to the stakeholders, to the employees, in the sense that they really have to come in and fulfill their mission, their purpose, their visions. And hopefully by aligning it with the company, we end up with this positive transformation that we talked before, transition transformation. So I think you perfectly answered.
I think COVID also helped the world to see a bit the strength and the fragility of what we have always referred to multi-stakeholder models. Because one thing is just, prioritizing shareholders, but when you understand that ecosystem of your employees, the people in your value chains, the customers and the consumers and the citizens that you serve, which industry, you end up with an ecosystem that is obviously much larger than just your immediate employees. So when you look at things holistically, including your strategic partners, whether that is public or private sector, you are looking at a much bigger ways of impacting livelihoods and pretty much the lives that are entrusted in you as a leader. So, thinking that with technology, we're going to address a lot of these things, it'll be, I think, a limited view. Because yes, of course, technology is going to facilitate and help us in many ways, but it's also a challenge directly to how we are seeing human capital in a social inequality that is already at its tipping points. So where I'm coming from is trying to help navigate and mitigate for organizations. How do we value and assess in this transition people, the education that we all need to have, because I think more than ever we need to overinvest in things that we need to learn, relearn, and unlearn, because I don't think what took us here is going to take us there. So we're going to have to be quite comfortable with unlearning and with knowing that there's a lot of things that we're just going to have to either stop doing to make space for the new things, or because simply they were not taking us to a sustainable, financial, equitable business model.
I see two threads in our conversation. Maybe let me take one of them, the thread of technology. And if we look at the evolution of the technology, I'll start with the fact that some years ago, internet was considered not the great unifier, but the great divider between the have and have-nots in the world. And how can we, not repeat the same the same kind of let's say mistake that we made? Internet, of course, it's a great technology, but had a long took a long time for it to really reach half, the 50% watermark, which of course is not sufficient, but at least was a good achievement. So do we have some lessons to learn and promote? And then we'll probably go on the thread of education and how we do this we fix this because that's where you concentrate a lot of your time, I understand.
So technology, it's a tricky one, right? Because it's now the double-edged sword with AI, and I say it in the sense of the genie is out of the bottle. I don't think regulation is a reality in the short and medium term, and even if it was, with the current geopolitics, I would even think it's a high risk, right? So just being realistic in the sense of there's a big unknown that we simply would just have to navigate into what are the applications and the impacts of this. Shifting into what it means now from a human capital and business perspective, of course, it poses a tremendous opportunity, but one that if we don't democratize and redistribute, we will alienate more and more parts of the population. I also worry very much about the dependency on technology, because if we have shocks in the system, whatever that be, I don't think we're geared up for analog responses at scale. And we have really learned through COVID the interdependencies that we have around the world, from supply chain, security, healthcare, education. So we are in an interdependent world, heavily reliant on technology and connectivity. And we should always be thinking from an adaptation and resilience perspective, how to operate with both to be really resilient. So I celebrate everything that technology is helping us to oversimplify or to do, so we could actually have space to do other things. And that's just fantastic. But yeah, it's the concentration of knowledge and wealth and power and technological capacity remains in the pockets of a few, and not really getting across the different countries and regions as we would like them to be. So my fear is more on the inequality part and how to reach that, and how to, of course, use it for good in many of the things that we're also discussing in this podcast. ESG, it's a fantastic news for ESG. I refer to the ESG sometimes complexity as the spaghettis, right? Now, all of these spaghettis will be a bit more organized and oversimplified, and it's going to be a great news for everyone. I don't think complexity on ESG is going to be a problem in the next 2 years, nor should be the excuse in the conversation as to look. And ESG at the end is just reporting. The big question is, what are we doing about it in organizations, whether you are public or not public organization, whether you have to disclose it or not. That is really, I think, the point.
We tend to say at AKFI that ESG, it's looking at the backward pointing mirror, right, in the rear view mirror, and really sustainability should become part of the strategy, or continue to be part of strategies, and
Absolutely.
grow in the strategic terms. And that brings to education. But I wanted to bring also another point, because Isabella, it's a published author, and she's asking very similar questions. She has a book of questions called the Digital Mind of Tomorrow. My joke is that the digital mind of tomorrow came today, because the AI came us with such a full force. The book was published maybe 3-4 months before AI was launched on ChatGPT, I should say, not AI. So I know that Isabella will have also a lot of questions for you. I don't know if she wants to share one, or we continue on the thread of education.
I love the double double-edged sword metaphor, and also everything you mentioned about how we rely on technologies. I dedicate a chapter just to talk about the degradation of humanities because of the progressive advancement of the technology today. So to the point, I argue that it's not about whether technology will replace us or surpass us. It's we ourselves, we became weaker and weaker, and we're not even compatible with the technology. So I definitely agree with you. We as humans should really think, how can we be an independent power, regardless the machines, the technology around us, and that's the only way for us to be sustainable.
Absolutely. And, I was just a very, very simple model, but I've been not one time, not a few times in cars with friends, and the spouse is arguing, do you believe the GPS or you believe me? Because GPS says right, and I say left, and you turn right because you believe tend to believe the technology is more reliable than our life partners, which is a little bit crazy to me.
Well, I mean, I think it's because we are so used to being given the solutions and the answers that there's a part in it. My dad actually jokes a lot with that. Vivi, if you don't use your internal compass, then you can't just be analog. What if you don't have the phone or a map? You just common sense, which for him comes quite naturally. But when you have relied so much on that, it's when you realize, or for example, how many phone numbers do we remember by memory? If I'm lucky now, my husband's in case of emergency, right? And mine, when I was in high school, I remember calling my home number. But there's a lot of things, really. I mean, if our phones die or if someone steals our phone, how do we access from the bank account to the email to the password? So there's so much dependency on these things that is also a bit unsettling. And now that we're entering a new phase with data privacy and being the mother of 2 young children, I also wonder, what does this mean for the new generation and for us, because this is a bit overwhelming too. So I think it's just all of us learning how to navigate and adapt. It'll come with good things and not so good things. From a business perspective, without a doubt, there is a lot of opportunities. From a socioeconomic perspective, used in a smart way, of course, there's tremendous advantages. But we are in for a very, very uncertain periods of time. And I think one of the biggest tests might be next year, when half of the world is on elections, and our democratic systems in some countries would have to be tested. And what the role of AI could play on this is also something yet to be seen. And at the end of the day, if there is a key message for students, especially watching this, it really depends on all of us what we do with it, right? Because the individual behavior will drive and will send a lot of signals to a lot of these organizations as well that are profiting from sometimes not so very sustainable models digitally. So yet to be seen. I if some of the numbers that I'm assessing from a user perspective, a lot of behaviors are changing. I do think that we're going to see a lot of changes in how we consume and we use our phones and the media and all of those things. I think we're coming to that point in where we're going to see a lot of patterns changing into all of that. I don't know what your views are on this, but I cannot imagine that we're going to continue consuming and using a lot of the digital frameworks as we do today.
I'll turn to the futurist, Isabella. What's your take on the spot? Is we're going to use more and more technology? Will be 24/7 connected, and let's not even talk about implants because they are coming. I know, and I'm not saying it in a catastrophic way, but we got to that technology in biology and. But Isabella, maybe I'll volunteer you for answering Vivi's question.
Well, I like Vivi's description of these kind of very in detail how technology is impacting us. To be honest, I think it's already very rare to find people who share such, in-depth mentality in understanding how we interact with technology. By saying that, it's before we're talking about, what we're going to do or what framework we need to develop, we need to share the awareness, the same mentality, to be on the same page. And Manuel, no, I wrote the book about it, everything about intersection between technology and humanity. And I've talked to quite amount of people, whether they're CXOs or they're regular, staff. And the common thing is the awareness, where we're not even getting on the same page. And a lot of people are expecting the same norm from the past. And to me, that itself, it's a huge battle. To me, it's a battle. It's not about, what we can do about it. It's how to make people aware and to start sharing these kind of mindset. And I found the younger generations are really hopeful because they're native, digital native, and they get it. So honestly, that's where I laid a lot of my hopeful, wishful thinking on to the younger generations. But I believe the mentality shared across different generations. It's not about, age or background. It's just that turning point when you click to see how technology is not just a technology. It's really changing our way of living and the way of thinking and the way we're interacting with each other, with the devices. So, Vivi, really, yeah, you were one of the few that I feel really grateful to hear that share such mentality in such a deep understanding of the relationship between humans and technology.
Oh, thank you, Isabel, and I look forward to reading your book. I mean, I think this is going to be at the heart of the years to come, right? How are we going to find a balance? How are we going to responsibly navigate and advocate for some things to some extent put some boundaries, whether that is for mental health, productivity, or from a human capital perspective. And it's actually now one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about education. So maybe just with that, I'll just, change gears into why, it was a natural move for me from private sector to now realizing that because there's everything to be done,